Many governments are recognizing that the potential of fintech is very hard to dispute. And this is particularly the case in emerging markets, where the penetration of banking and insurance services is relatively low, yet smartphone penetration is relatively high. So fintech can really help with inclusion of the unbanked and SMEs through such products as e-wallets, mobile payments, and automated accounting for SMEs. In terms of countries that stand out, a number of countries where my company EBRD works have seen fintech as a tool that helps them leapfrog the more developed economies. So by way of example, Georgia has been one of the first countries in the world to introduce blockchain in land registries, and they're now considering the use of smart contracts for the transfer of immovable property. Similarly, a number of countries such as Kazakhstan, Armenia, Morocco, and Turkey have pioneered the adoption of crowdfunding regulation, and they want to introduce crowdfunding platforms as an alternative source of financing for SMEs and startups. Belarus has a high-tech park where they offer special legal and tax treatment to fintech startups. Baltic states, pioneers of digital adoption. We have to remember, however, that these are much smaller countries than a number of others, so it actually is relatively easy to adopt regulation and a framework that facilitates the use of such tools as digital identity nationwide. So many national authorities are recognizing the potential of fintech, yet they are rightly concerned about risks that fintech may pose to their financial systems and their customers from the perspective of consumer protection. So we've all heard the axiom that regulation needs to be flexible enough to foster innovation, yet also ensure that investors are adequately protected. But what exactly does that mean in practice? So there are a plethora of legal questions, fundamental legal questions that need to be answered, and the answers to which will have a huge impact on the pace of adoption of fintech, both in public and private sector. So by way of example, when we talk about alternative funding platforms such as crowdfunding platforms, there are fundamental issues about how those platforms should be regulated in terms of authorization that should be required for them to operate, governance that we should expect from them, and most importantly, disclosures that they should be required to make to investors. When we talk about crypto assets, again, fundamental questions about whether or not crypto assets constitute property under applicable legislation. If so, what type of property, and how do you even prove ownership over a crypto asset? Is the mere knowledge of private key, for example, sufficient to prove ownership? And when we talk about distributed ledger technology, blockchain, there are issues around allocation of liability in a distributed system, particularly if we are talking about open source software. How do you begin to identify applicable law in such system? And then when we talk about compliance with GDPR, is hashed data tantamount to personal data under GDPR? So again, very fundamental and basic legal questions, the answer to which, in my opinion, will have an impact on the pace of adoption of fintech.